And welcome back to episode 36 of Pursuing the Perfect Pint podcast. And this week we're going somewhere a little bit different, which is about the importance of differing perspectives. And it's a bit of a departure, Brent, from our usual more technical discussions, but people is kind of what makes the whole supply chain work. So I think looking forward to a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think as we were talking about prepping for this, Danielle, I guess we follow the world of malt and, of course, everything brewing and distilling related and so on. But we're going to get into something here that's really important and what Sharon did share with us in Lisbon, and I thought it was really good to come back around. To be honest, it's a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I certainly think it's hugely important, and I think Sharon does a really nice job in how she puts that in understandable context.
Absolutely. But before we get into that, Brent, you got another graph. It's either a graph or a map. So what graphs are you sharing with us this week as we look at the pod?
I thought given this is I was looking at the crude oil chart and it just shows quite clearly that we've just had continued volatility. It's almost been like our drought, Danielle. We've had this relentless drought in Europe. At the same time, this geopolitical thing has, I would almost say, as well been relentless. We just, whether it be events in the Middle East, we hear a lot about the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S.-Iran situation, which we've talked about endlessly, and of course, Russia-Ukraine, all the disruptions to their infrastructure, and I guess one discussion I had recently, Danielle, was. In past conflicts, there has been previous conflicts like this, unfortunately, and the cases where there was attacks on oil and energy infrastructure. That's kind of common. What's really changed, which was an interesting discussion recently, is now the grain infrastructure has been
yes.
included in this, which is different because in a way maybe it was the unspoken rule that you didn't disrupt the food networks, but that has changed. So now that's been part of the conflict. So this has escalated to a new place, and something that normally was maybe not included. So that's an interesting thing. So we're just in this disruptive environment and not seeing any end to it, really.
But I think you and I were talking a little bit before we started the podcast, Brent. I think there's a lot of sensationalism in the news around food shortages, etc. But I think the purpose of this podcast, as you like to remind me and everyone else, we're in a big world. So whilst Europe is struggling, there's still a lot of other barley, wheat, and other cereals in other parts of the globe. So the overall picture doesn't look as bleak.
Yeah, it may be. There's definitely a problem in Europe, that's for sure. And we've had the warmest, hottest, driest summer that I can remember in 16 years here. And so there's definitely impacts to it. I think part of it is, though, of course, notwithstanding those problems, there's some equally very good situations in other parts of the world. Russia's got a big wheat crop. Australia looks very, very good. Canada looks quite good. So in terms, it may be just where people are taking the opportunity to build a story around it, but fundamentally, you wouldn't see globally that we're going to have food shortages and these sort of things. I guess it's there used to be an old saying, if your dentist started talking to you about the wheat market, you knew it was way overblown.
Yeah.
At that point, it's gone into kind of the social craze.
Yeah.
I guess I would leave it at that.
And leaving that, Brent, if we're going to get through all these geopolitical challenges and all the weather challenges, the role of people in that, and I think I personally loved Sharon's talk at Lisbon, Sharon Peake from Shape Talent. So let's hear what she and you spoke about in the podcast.
Okay, well, the pursuit of the perfect pint is making a little step out of maybe what we normally talk about and reconnecting. So Sharon Peake's here with us, and she's going to introduce herself and what she does. But I guess first of all, Sharon, you were with us in Lisbon earlier this year, so thanks for presenting to the group there. So I guess I'll start with another thank you for being part of that, and maybe what we could start with is maybe a little bit of an introduction to Sharon, first of all, and also to Shape Talent. So you could say anyone that wasn't with us in Lisbon, they could understand a little bit about who you are and what keeps you busy.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Brent. So, hello, everyone. I'm Sharon Peake. I'm the founder and CEO of Shape Talent. Shape Talent is an organization that works with typically large organizations to solve their talent pipeline problems, particularly around gender equity and helping to increase women's representation in leadership. By way of background, I'm a chartered occupational psychologist. I spent the first 20 years of my career working in-house in senior HR roles, senior talent management roles for large organizations, one of which was the brewer SABMiller, where I was the group head of talent management, group director of talent management for 6 years. And you may tell from my accent, I don't hail from this area. I grew up in Australia, so I have spent 25 years living and working in the UK.
Yeah, very good. Well, people that listen to this may start to piece it all together, but we do have a lot of connections back to SABMiller, which, first of all, I think is a wonderful network. Even though we maybe didn't cross paths directly so much, we all know someone who knows someone that led us to this. So with
Indeed.
Danielle's help, essentially we got to this point. So I guess I'm still amazed in some ways that the SAB network a decade later still stays very well connected. So first to that. So I guess when we get more into the things you focus on, you talked about helping organizations with their talent pipeline or their talent pool. I guess what you talked about in Lisbon was a lot around, there's a lot of things that women bring to organizations that people need to remember, right? There's a different mindset, a different way of thinking. Maybe you could talk a little bit around some of the things when you work with organizations. What are the things you remind them of, or you educate them about what they should consider when they're looking at their talent pipeline?
Yeah, well, I think a good, strong talent pipeline gives an organization continuity. So you want to have a pipeline, particularly a leadership pipeline, but a pipeline of talent at all levels of the organization where you can run your business successfully with the right people to get the best results. And so when we look at it from a gender lens, we're not looking at it in terms of getting more women because it's a warm and fuzzy, nice thing to do. We're looking at it because the best performing teams, research shows the best performing teams are those that have a diverse kind of range of views and perspectives and experiences. So gender is one element of that, but obviously there are other elements. And we know as a broad industry, I mean, brewing, distilling, malting kind of is a very broad industry, but we know that industry and the sub-industries within do have an underrepresentation of women in leadership. We know that, and having worked in the industry for some years myself, I know that firsthand. I worked in an organization that had 81% male employees across the 70,000 employee base. So, very, very male dominated. And there are industries like that where it's not as easy, I think, to get women into the organization and certainly into leadership, but there are ways of doing it. Let me maybe share a statistic that I find helpful, and hopefully the listeners will too, which is around how decisions are made when you have diverse teams. So the research is really clear that when you have homogenous teams, so teams where everyone's experiences are kind of the same, when you have homogenous leadership teams, the research is very clear that decisions do get made faster. So decision making is quicker, but what the research also shows is that the decisions aren't as higher quality. Because what happens in homogenous teams is that we're better at agreeing with each other, we're better at kind of supporting each other, but not as good at challenging kind of weaknesses in an argument, so not as good at bringing the critical thinking. Whereas when you have different perspectives, people from different backgrounds, people from different lived experiences, they will naturally bring a different perspective. They'll have a different set of reference points. They'll ask different questions, and that's where you get the better quality outcomes. So there's something about encouraging diversity of thought in its very broadest sense that's really important to making sure that you're robust and resilient, particularly through the challenging times that the industry is experiencing now.
Yeah. So you see the value for that person that would be sitting there to say, well, what if we thought about this? Or what have we ever considered this in whatever the topic is that they're considering. I guess it's so you're looking at it from the data would support the fact that when you have a more diverse group of people, you'll have more people that are willing to make those kind of, I would not say challenges, but they will challenge a little bit in terms of, have we looked at this all the way, or could we look at it differently? And I guess that's where you start to see the difference in this case, that you say women could bring a different way of looking at certain topics.
And if I can introduce a couple of other data points, there is some well-established, well-trodden research that shows the financial benefits. If you're looking to quantify what that means, financial performance of the business is one. So McKinsey data has shown consistently over a large number of years now that companies with more than 30% women at the top, in the top roles, 27% more likely to outperform financially than their peers. Another research study finds that you get more revenue from innovation when you have more women. So 45% revenue from innovation compared to 26% revenue from innovation for the top performing companies. That's a BCG research finding. And the other one that I think is really important to remember is about governance. So this was a huge study. I think it was 58 countries covered in this. They found that there are fewer governance related issues and controversies when you have better gender balance at the top. So 24% fewer governance problems, whether it's bribery, fraud, shareholder issues. And of course, nobody wants those. They're distractions that are unhelpful for everyone. So lots of good reasons from well-established research why more gender diversity is helpful for organizations.
Yeah, and I think and you touched on it at the beginning. I guess, I hope there's not too many people, but there could be some people that think a lot of this is driven by just having the numbers because you're ticking the box on some kind of measurable. But maybe, hopefully, through this and other discussions like this, you can use the statistics, and the data would support that it's actually not about that at all. It's about something much more business focused and business centric in terms of the performance of the business improves. And frankly, who could argue against that? Would be kind of the simple way if you wanted to put it. I think you mentioned challenging times. I think we'll come back to it. But one question you triggered was, you talked about having worked in an organization with 81% of being, say, a male-oriented business. There has been, I guess, to make sure that's not totally forgotten, but there has been a lot of progress. Again, if I think the SABMiller example, and I think you shared when we prepared for Lisbon, some of the work that was done to get more women into, say, leading brewing roles in the breweries, because breweries are probably more than the 81% if you looked at operating breweries, and there was a concerted effort to get more women involved in roles, senior roles in these breweries, and that came from the top, and you were part of that. Maybe you could share a little bit. So that's one part of the question, is that experience. But my real question was, the pace of change seems quite slow, and I don't know what can be done to accelerate other than sharing the word. But maybe start with that SAB example of putting women into senior brewing roles, and then we can talk a bit around the pace. There's been progress made, but it still seems that the pace is quite slow.
Yeah, great. So let me talk about the SABMiller experience. So this started from a recognition that there was a succession issue brewing in the brewing function, if you excuse the pun. And succession is an issue that actually a lot of companies in this industry are facing. There are some well-documented succession challenges, family-owned businesses not passing down to the next generation, food and beverage industries losing key executives without succession in place. This is a phenomenon that's very well established in the industry. So we had a succession issue brewing where we had a range of regional chief brewers that were due to retire within a window of, I think it was the next 5 years or something. And we could see that we didn't have enough people coming up the pipeline to step into those roles. So these are really critical roles. We needed to have continuity. So we looked at how we could accelerate the succession, because you've got two choices here where you've got a gap in your pipeline. You can hire someone in, or you can grow from within. And for various reasons, we didn't want to hire someone in. We didn't want to bring talent from a competitor. It's a very small pool, firstly. But secondly, we had our own ways of doing things. So we wanted to grow within. And that was a real philosophy of SABMiller. So we looked at who are the people in the pipeline that maybe were a bit further out, recognizing it took at least 8 years from a skilled technician role to kind of get to readiness, and we didn't necessarily have 8 years. So who were the people in the pipeline that we could concentrate on and accelerate? And we did specifically look at how we could include women in that. And so we came up with development plans that were bespoke to the individuals. So someone had great technical skills but poor visibility, and so they needed greater visibility. We paired them up with a sponsor who could help raise their profile. Someone else had a great track record, but only in one location, hadn't worked outside the country. So we gave them a rotation to give them exposure to other operations, other ways of doing things, other cultures. And so we came up with a way of accelerating the talent through the pipeline so that we could get them ready sooner. And this is something that all organizations can do. You've just got to think about what it is that the gaps are. So what's the standard you're trying to meet? Where's the individual? And kind of map out their skills, their experience, what the gap is, so that you can come up with a plan to address that gap. And mostly that can be done internally. It doesn't, we didn't need expensive training courses. This is about pairing them with the right people for mentorship, for sponsorship, getting them the right experiences to develop their technical capabilities and so forth.
Yeah, a fantastic example. So you had a problem, which was the succession planning, and you had also identified the opportunity that the role of women could actually enhance the organization at the end of this. So you got kind of a 2-for-1 benefit out of all this.
Yeah.
And that, if I say it in those words, but I guess then it'll go to the pace of change question I also raised is you just gave that example that you were working on this particular project and your timeline was 5 to 8 years. So this is also something people would have to commit to, right? You'd have to really buy into the idea and be prepared to work on it. It's not going to be fixed by next Thursday. That's for sure.
Yeah, not when it comes to internal development. Now, you can, of course, solve that more quickly with recruitment if you're able to, in a tight market. And we're operating in tough times at the moment where people typically will just hold on to their jobs. So there's a lot of job hugging, as it's called, that goes on where people don't leave because there's too much risk with leaving when the economy is tough and the industry is struggling. So people will stay where they are. So it doesn't always enable you to recruit, but it's a quicker way of doing it. But it also comes with lots of risks. If you don't hire well, if you don't recruit well, then actually you can have a lot of churn.
Yeah. Well, that does lead into, and you touched on it, we talked about it in prepping for it. The industry has been, if I take the brewing industry, 3 years of volume decline and related the whiskey production drop last year, and left the multi-supply chain with it. It's been a very, very challenging time. And as we talked about in prepping for this, I guess I was kind of with the idea that during challenging times, it's probably even more important to stay focused on these things because you could be distracted. Someone could be distracted that times are tough. So let's park various initiatives and let's just focus on the business as we've always done it. And that's not necessarily the right outcome. So I guess maybe you could talk a little bit around maybe even more so that you should focus on these things when times are tough.
Yeah, it is so easy, isn't it, when you've got real pressures on the business to focus on, to have a single point of focus on that challenge and navigating the urgency that often accompanies that challenge. We've all been there, we've all been in those situations, but you're absolutely right. You've got to, in parallel, be building for the longer term. So whether that's building your talent pipeline so you've got the right skills when you need them, particularly for those organizations that have very niche skills where you can't easily go out and recruit someone else because there might only be kind of a few people in the world that have those skills. You've got to make sure you're keeping your eye on how you're developing your capability within the organization, and that's a medium to long-term endeavor. And when it comes to gender, it's the same thing. You've got to keep your eye on the ball. And of course, if people aren't moving jobs that much because they're staying where they are, it gives you fewer opportunities to influence the representation of women in leadership because you've got fewer recruitment opportunities to bring in external talent, which puts even more pressure on making sure you're growing your female talent from within. There's one thing we used to say at SABMiller that perhaps is helpful to listeners, which is we used to say every appointment matters. And it's a really obvious and simple thing when you say it like that. But every decision about recruitment or promotion, every time you fill a role, it really, really, really matters who you're putting into that role, because you're weighing up two things. You're weighing up, what do I need right now to get the job done right now? And that's, for a lot of line managers, that's 90% of the consideration. But actually, I would argue that should be 50% of the consideration. And the rest should be, will this person help us in future? So will they be able to grow into roles that we need in future? Are they the sort of talent that we're looking to bring in? Are they going to help us to elevate women into leadership, for example? So thinking about every single appointment and not being too focused on the fact that you've got a real problem now, you've got a problem and a vacancy right now that needs to be plugged. Thinking beyond that to what are the longer term implications of every single recruitment and promotion decision.
Yeah. Well, I think you could stretch it even further. Some people would say you should hire someone that would be in a position to take your job sometime in the future, right? That would be, if you really could think about it outside, not think about yourself in that sense, but for the organization. So it is very strategic in the sense, right? You should say, this organization will be better in 10 years if we hire this person. And if this person takes my job, that is actually the best thing for the organization. I guess that's an extreme example, but that would be good. Well, I think, Sharon, it's great. I think anyone that listens to this is going to learn a lot. If they have questions, they can certainly reach out and get in touch with us, and we'll pass them on to you. I think there'd be some things you could help people steer that. If they have questions or they're just not sure how to get started, you just described all kinds of things that can be done. And not that they're difficult. You just have to take a moment to sit and think through what do you actually want to achieve and have that kind of strategic lens fairly close by, and then I think you could achieve it. So thanks for sharing those thoughts. First of all, we'd like to wrap it up. I warned you in advance. We're called Pursuit of the Perfect Pint, and sometime between your time in the UK or if you're back to Australia, would you have an idea of what the perfect pint would look like from your side?
Well, the perfect pint to me is an experience, actually, and the most immediate thing that comes to mind is a barbecue. So being brought up in Australia, I'm very well familiar with barbecues as a regular way of socializing, of entertaining. We do them here all the time in London. Rain, hail or shine, we'll have barbecues. So it takes me to a barbecue with friends and family, all relaxed and all having fun. So it doesn't matter what your preference is or your beer preference. In Australia, it might be a schooner rather than a pint, but being together and enjoying each other's company. And to me, that's the perfect pint. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be quite natural for an Aussie to talk about a barbecue or a Barbie. So that's probably the best way.
If I didn't.
So thanks for that. I could only agree. That would be on one of the top lists of things to enjoy. So Sharon, thanks again for sharing the insights and really good to stay in touch.
Thank you so much for having me, Brent.
All the best. Cheers.
Thank you.
I personally love that phrase, Brent. Every appointment matters. And I think if you don't do things deliberately, they just won't happen.
Yeah. And I have to say, Danielle, it was probably one of the easiest podcasts to do because it's such an important topic and it's not in my area of expertise at all, but I do understand and feel strongly that it is important. But to have someone like Sharon that can just put it in language that we could all understand is really good. And some of the examples that she talked about and the importance of this, I think it was really well done and was quite good.
I think maybe a challenge to everybody listening. I think all the big maltsters, other people in the supply chain do a lot to talk about their female representation in senior leadership, which does bring diversity of thinking. But if you look at the core technical functions, I think women are still very underrepresented, and it is an industry which requires niche skills. So how do we actually drive better diversity and gender representation across the full supply chain, not just in the support functions, be it finance, HR, sustainability and things like that?
Yeah, and I guess it's not to say there's been lots of work, and Sharon talked about the SAB example, and there's lots of others, I'm sure. So there can be more to be done, I guess, is the message. So I guess I think it's important, and you do as well, Danielle, that we profile things like this because we get in touch with people like Sharon who have a message. the bottom line, as I look at it, the data, because data is important.
Yeah.
The data says that if you've got that diversity of thinking and the business will benefit from it. So it's not about, getting certain numbers or hitting certain targets. It's actually, how can you get your business moving, maybe even to a better place more quickly, and that diversity of thoughts is quite important. So there's a good message. Everyone should take something away from it. I learned in Lisbon and catching up again with Sharon many more things. So I think it's just a great point to reemphasize.
Absolutely, and doesn't happen by accident. Requires a bit of planning, just like everything else we do. And looking forward to seeing you next week, Brent.
Yep, we'll catch up again.
Cheers.
Cheers.